Hello, I'm Nicholas Giannessi.
And I'm Fletcher Nugent, and welcome again to the Podcast. This week, there is no guest, but we'll upload another episode later in the week with a exciting guest, a different guest, which we're looking forward to. So for today, Nick and I decided we'll just have a chat and see what comes up.
Which was always the plan with this podcast anyway. We'll put something on every week, no matter what, regardless of whether we can get someone on or not, and discuss things that we think are relevant.
Yeah, we'll just have a chat, see what comes out, because, this podcast started with us just having a chat on the phone for 18 months and then deciding it'd probably be good to record it. So, yeah, if there's anything, again, anyone wants us to have a chat about or speak about, we're happy to entertain it. So,
and questions?
Yeah, comment. So, yeah, what do you want to talk about?
I think compassion is important right now, and the emphasis on service. Because when I'm looking at what's going on in the world today, I'm still concerned that there's still a mindset of us versus them. And if they, let's say, get taken down, if we come from a place of, we did it, yeah, let's get rid of the bastards or whatever, I don't think that's a victory in any way.
It's not. And the reason why it's not is because it's how it's done. So I just comes to mind like halal meat. It's killed in an ethical way, or supposedly killed in an ethical way. It's how you do things, but it's the imprint that it leaves on your mind and the habits and the karma that those actions create. So it's not actually the act that's done so much, it's how it's done. So if we go forth and we decide that we're going to take all these people down for the horrific things that have happened, and we have that killer mindset, kill or be killed mindset, and destroy them, and are just as destructive, then we leave that imprint on the world and in our own minds, which is
We're
not
in the same situation.
That's correct. And it's a circle. It's just going to keep repeating itself. So it's, how do you then approach it? You touched on compassion before. How do you approach something that you see as obviously wrong? You feel like there's something in you that needs to fight or stand up. How do you approach that?
For me, I've always seen it as being the difference between the mind and the heart. You know what I mean? I think the mind is defensive and it sees right, wrong, good or bad. Whereas I think, my teachers often spoke about building an unshakable heart. For me, an unshakable heart is a compassionate heart. It is a heart that understands the suffering on both sides. The path of non-violence in thoughts, action, and speech is the solution. We've spoken about this many times. Ahimsa. But at the same time, I still think there's still a place and a time, in my opinion, to stand up for the people. But I'll be honest with you, I've been very impressed, actually, with how peaceful the protests have been. It's only, especially back in England, I've been watching it. My sister and a lot of people back in England who are peacefully protesting, which is lovely to see. But it's still us versus them mentality, in my opinion.
Do you think that it has to be for a period of time? Because
I do, yeah.
Yeah, we see an obvious division,
but it's because people are afraid, you see.
Mm-hmm.
And because they're pushed into a corner.
I think that'd be something good to touch on, because it's often when we get into these ideas of right or wrong, and potentially, I know from my perspective, I can feel like there's perhaps some lies going on that are more obvious in the macro environment that people are taking in. And it's it's hard to sit here and say that they're right, but my point is that you can't look from it from a standpoint of right or wrong. So if you're looking at it from a standpoint of right or wrong, you're automatically creating a division. But as we said before, I think right now, to stand up for perhaps what is good and our freedoms and our rights, there is a necessity to stand. So the question becomes, how do we stand? How do we fight?
What comes back to the original question, what I said is the selfless nature, because judging by what I consider to be right or wrong is based on everybody else. You know, what's the best thing for the whole? You know, I don't think, you know, the amount of research that I've done onto what the cabal or the 1% or whatever you want to label them with, what they practice and do is detrimental to anything that's outside of that small group. But at the same time, I have also shared that on a grander scale, 2020 has been the best year for me, without a shadow of a doubt, because since COVID came along, everyone now is aware of the immune system. Therefore, it's been a blessing. With second lockdown in the UK and in Victoria and places like that and around the world, it's pushed people outside of their comfort zone, which they would never have done before. They're standing up for their rights. They're standing up for themselves and for other businesses. They're learning common law. So, I mean, there's always a greater good. But but if let's say we didn't act, then if we didn't get outside of our comfort zone, for example, and we did get pushed into the agenda that they're pushing, it's not a good scenario for the earth, for nature, for humanity.
Yeah, 100%. And you look at your own individual reactions or actions and you think, oh, I can react to this or I can respond. But what you said before is having the higher ideal of the greater good and service for other and the benefit for all beings is where we need to come from. And I specify the benefit of all beings. So they're the perpetrators and the victims. And it's the same love. It's the one love. It's the interconnectedness of all things. And I think it's important to remember that we are the creators. We get to decide not so much what we're faced with, but how we face it. And that's the important thing. And that's where I really find the benefits of a spiritual practice and meditation, because I can set that intention. I can explore that intention each and every day. And that keeps me focused and centered. Of course, I step off the path every day, all the time. But it's a continual practice, which we've mentioned many times. And I think when you begin to go into the depths of your mind and you see how you respond and how you react, you build a natural compassion, a natural loving understanding for others, and perhaps things that before you didn't see as clearly, like the mistakes they were making. And I know that we've heard a lot of people speak about in our own circles and get quite angry about the pedophilia and the child sacrifice, and there's some very extreme examples, but often what's forgotten there is that the people perpetrating these acts have had those acts committed to them. And if you acknowledge that side within you and the capabilities of you to do something that evil, if that was perpetrated upon you since you were a child, you begin to grow the sense of compassion for your heart for those people. It doesn't mean that it's right. We're not talking about right or wrong here, but as I said, we're the creators. We have the power to change. So what world do we want to create? And how we create it is the most important thing.
There's a story there's a Buddhist book that I've got. It says, imagine coming out the shop with all your groceries and you stagger into the car and someone just bumps into you and the both of you fall over, all your groceries have spilled everywhere. And immediately, angrily, you jump up and you're about to say, are you blind? You know, didn't you see me? And you look and that person that bumped into you is blind.
Yeah.
Straight away, you shift to compassion and you see that in the same situation as you, are you okay? You help them up because there's an understanding now. So that's why I think, you know, when you talk about, if you listen to Jay Parker, for example, he was brought up in a Illuminati family that was subject to a lot of these sexual abuse and incredible torture. When I say torture, it's on a level that I couldn't even comprehend. Even though I've known about this stuff for 10 years, I listened to a podcast just a month ago and it blew my mind away. You know, the first 7 years of a child's life, we know, is when their personality is shaped because there's no filters on the information that's coming in. And basically, they have techniques that they've been working and evolving for. He says his parents told him this religion goes back 9,000 BC. So they literally do things to the children as soon as they're born to completely fracture their mind. And I made a video called Satanism, Samsara, and Compassion. And it's basically showing that it's important video, in my opinion, because it's showing how we entangle in that karma when we judge them. And we could reincarnate into those families, because if you see someone that's doing these practices, and we're saying they're innocent kids, how can you do this to innocent kids? Which I agree with, by the way. But then you just say you condemn them to hell. I hope you burn in hell. I hope you blah, blah, blah. When they die, they may very well go to hell. And being born in those families and having those things done to them is hell. But then when you see the babies, you're saying to the babies, we need to save them, which we do. I agree. We need to stop this practice. But my point is, if you understood, like when you see the blind person that's lying on the floor who's just bumped into you and you got angry with, if you see in the adult that's doing the practices, the fact that he was born into these families, you see the innocent baby in them, and it's a different perspective.
Absolutely. Perspective is everything. And there's a practice, I think it's a Buddhist practice. I read it in a Buddhist book, saying that if you're trying to practice compassion and perhaps you're struggling, it's changing your perception, consciously changing your perception. So looking at everyone as your brother or your sister or your mother or your auntie. So you see a woman walking down the street and see them as your auntie or your mother or your sister. You see a person walking down the street, a man, see him as your brother, as your son, as your father, and automatically just notice what happens within you.
Well, there's a Buddhist practice where, because everything the Buddha taught was encouraged to investigate, because the deeper you go into the teaching, even if you're trying to prove it wrong, every aspect of it has solid ground. Mm-hmm. So when you look at beginningless time, and I'm not a Buddhist, by the way, but when you look at beginningless time and how many countless incarnations we've had in different life forms, anybody that we see that comes into our life, it is safe to say has been our mother countless times, maybe in a different life form, maybe as a deer or whatever, but they have supported us, nourished us, gave us food when they were starving. No matter how sick they were, they've nurtured us first. They would have given their life for us. So it is only through karma that they are lost in this life. But if you think of the randomness of you watching this video and me knowing Fletch, if you think of all the different beings you could be throughout the cosmos in any different timeline, the chances of us being here now is like more than winning the lottery. You know what I mean? So any information that comes my way or comes into my view, or anyone I see on the screen, even on a TV screen, I believe there's a spiritual reason for that. Therefore, if I see suffering, I ask for forgiveness for anything I've played in that. And therefore, I think it's important, because if you see someone that you know is so lost in this life, creating huge suffering in this life, and I was going to do a video about this today, actually. Would you give your life to save them? And what I mean by that is my Buddhist teacher, when I was going through a very hard, probably the hardest point I've been on in my spiritual journey, I was thanking her. I was saying, thank you so much for everything you've done. And she said to me, she said, use my shoulders to get into heaven. Right? And it made me cry. And I remember speaking to my Tao teacher, my Taoist master, my spiritual father. And I told him what she said. And he said, that's actually a Buddhist story. He said, there's a famous story in Buddhism where a Buddha or a Bodhisattva is about to reach Buddhahood. And he sees a ghost suffering in the hell realm. And he sacrifices his own Buddhahood and he lets the ghost go ahead of him. And it's a beautiful story. It's a beautiful teaching.
Do you think, I think that level of compassion comes through understanding. And where does understanding come from? Knowing the self. So
knowing your own suffering.
Knowing your own suffering. And that's one of the insights I'm getting more and more through meditation at the moment that's really coming up, is that I'm experiencing on some level, and there's many levels, just the ubiquitous nature of it all, how it's just one mind, and my mind is just one mind, and how I create these blocks, these like repeated patterns in my head that separate myself from the people around me and others and nature. And fundamentally, these practices that I do, they're purification practices. So what does that mean? It means that you're purifying yourself. You're coming back to your original self.
What are you purifying?
You're purifying these illusions, these
Karma.
misunderstandings, these karmas, these actions. And through that comes understanding, and things like this in compassion organically grow within you, because you understand that your mind is the mind of all things and all beings. And it's also humility comes through that as well, because once you go deeper into your mind and you see how lost you have been, and you get perhaps even just more of a fragment of an understanding how far you need to still go, you look at others around you, perhaps those in front of you or below you, if you look at it that way, and your heart automatically opens because you feel the suffering, you see the suffering, and you see deeper into the illusion.
You know, I've been using compassion in my forgiveness practices. I've been doing forgiveness practice for, since I've been with my teacher 10 years. But over the past, maybe 18 months of understanding compassion, because I don't think I really understood compassion for a long time.
What didn't you understand about it? Like, did you have what was the misunderstanding before? What did you think it was?
I don't know. I can't put my finger on it. But when through the Buddhist teachings, I think it might have even been Thich Nhat Hanh, he said it's love with understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's okay to say, the way I saw it was, just say I love my mum, dad, brother, sister, wife. I love them because I love them. There's no doubt about it. But they might be doing something that's harmful to themselves or me, and it frustrates me. When I understood to see their suffering, why they do it, I got compassion. I was like, wow, that makes something. It just got me. You know what I mean? Because then you forgive. So I use compassion in my forgiveness now, meaning that when I ask all beings I've ever hurt to forgive me, I ask them to please to understand my suffering then. And then when I look at people who've hurt me or who are hating people in the world, I say, I see your suffering and I forgive you.
Mm-hmm.
And this is important when we're looking at ourselves, because if I did something when I was 18 that was a mistake, I'm not that person now. So I have to be able to see that me at 18 and be compassionate and understand what suffering I was going through then, to feel like I had to do what I did in order to be loved by my mates or whatever it was. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's the importance of experience as well, I feel. And that's one thing I haven't liked about 2020 is when I say I haven't liked, that I've noticed that the need within myself to have social interaction and experience things and continue to experience things, not be afraid to do so, because they're the greatest lessons.
I think I wouldn't mind touching on the Dalai Lama. Now, I'm not here to defend anyone, but I've listened to a number of the Dalai Lama's books, and I've just re-listened to one called The Path to Enlightenment, which I strongly recommend that anyone listening to this or watching this listens to or reads. The Dalai Lama's being linked to a lot of things right now. Like my mate's literally just before I did this, my mate in England, he's a great researcher, lovely guy. He just sent me a article from Lama Surya Das where the Dalai Lama's talking about climate change, right? And obviously, I don't believe in climate change. I believe in climate change. Don't believe in how they say what climate change is. I mean, I believe climate change is just the weather. And he's in the same boat as me.
You mean like, it's just to clarify that it's a naturally occurring phenomenon rather than
what they're telling us, global warming.
Then it's all humanity's fault and we're mucking the word up. I don't believe that either. I believe we obviously, just to clarify again, we obviously play a role. Of course, you can't say we don't, but I think that they're manipulating a natural pattern.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. And those people who are doing that are the ones that want to increase pollution.
And if people want to research that, they can go and have a look at one source that pops to mind, which is Greg Braden. I think it's on Missing Links, maybe.
It is, yeah. He talks about the ice.
They drill down into the ice, and each year there's a layer that's formed, and that gives them indications of what the weather patterns were like. And the sample size is something like 400,000 years. That's how far they can drill down. So they're able to look at the patterns of weather and changes of 400,000 years. And yeah, essentially his conclusion from my understanding was that it is a naturally occurring phenomenon that we go in cycles.
Well, he actually mentions Al Gore in that. I don't know whether he mentions it in that, but I've heard him mention Al Gore. He might be in that. But Al Gore, in that, what's it called? An Inconvenient Truth?
Inconvenient Truth, yeah.
He talks about how there's a link between temperature and CO2.
Yeah.
In the atmosphere, and that's what he's pushing. But Greg Braden said if you look at the ice, there is a link, but he's reversed it intentionally. It's the other way around. The drilling into the ice showed us that the temperature got warmer first, and then CO2. And it was over, I think it was 400 or 800 years. The time difference. So, just little things how they manipulate things. That's a whole other conversation. But with do you want to touch on?
No. Well said.
But with the Dalai Lama, he's getting, he's obviously, I don't know whether someone's posting for him, but he's spoke about climate change. Okay. People like my friend there are saying, he's being manipulated. He's saying, he's with all these high-profile people who are being linked to pedophilia and child trafficking and all the rest of it. And now, again, I'm not here to defend him, but we've spoke about the concept of understanding what the Bodhisattva vow is.
Correct.
The Bodhisattva vow is for all beings. I vow to serve and relieve all beings from suffering. May I never reach Buddhahood. You know what I'm saying? So even if the Dalai Lama knew that they were who they were, and in the book, The Path to Enlightenment, he goes into karma, he goes into the hell realms and how he goes deep. You will definitely have a different understanding of how the Dalai Lama sees the world or how the Bodhisattva sees the world. So from my understanding of observing that, the Dalai Lama, for example, no matter who comes into our field, there's a spiritual reason for that. And he says in that book, he says, if I can't save them, who will? If I'm not going to help them, who will? Do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, it gets on, for me, the idea of attachment as well, detachment. Because if you're detached, you just serve. There's no conditions on your service. And true detachment means that you help and you do as you can, and then you walk away. And there's a book I'm reading at the moment, which is Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, and it's a commentary on it. I forget who the commentary is, but he makes a distinction saying that keep your heart with God. So your heart in oneness for understanding, and then your mind in the world. And naturally you have this sense of detachment. I found that very helpful.
You know, I just, when someone gives themselves to unconditional selfless service, like my spiritual teacher made the same vow, you can't be taken advantage of. But the thing is, let's say, for example, the people who run the world, these cabal, these 1%, and bear in mind, in all of my teachings, anything I've ever wrote, any video I've ever made, I always say, I don't say hate them. I don't say fight them, resist them. I say love them, forgive them, be compassionate, but stand together, okay? So if you are of complete selflessness, selfless service, you can't be taken advantage of. So let's say these people who want to manipulate the world because of their suffering, they put him in positions where he might be on a bill where it's to stop climate change, or he might be something here, there, whatever. They might think they're manipulating him, right? They might think they're playing the Dalai Lama, and they love having a name like that on something that they're doing while they're doing dirty work. From the Dalai Lama's perspective, he's just serving. He's just serving. Again, I'm not defending him, because I remember speaking to my Buddhist teacher about this, and the Dalai Lama did something. My Buddhist teacher's Chinese. A few years ago, the Dalai Lama did something that aggravated China. I can't remember what it was. And my Buddhist teacher said that some of her other friends who were Chinese, who were Buddhist, said to her, why did he do that? And she said, obviously, she said, I don't know exactly. She said, but you've got to understand that the further a teacher like that goes, the more detached they are. So they don't even want to make decisions. Now, people might find that hard to believe, because a leader makes decisions, you get me? But it's a complete surrendering to whatever life presents you. So wherever, I don't even think the Dalai Lama, and let's change the subject, let's say someone like, I don't know, Amma or someone like that, they may do, but I believe many of them might be so detached that they go wherever their team or their PAs or whatever try and put them, because they're just going to serve and to teach compassion to whoever needs it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes sense. And again, I would encourage anyone to continue on their own practice, because you see that more and more and you understand it more and more. But I also think that everyone in this world has a role to play. So your role may be not to be a bodhisattva, and so what means your role may be to stand and fight, a warrior. But what I'm harping on is that it's how you do that. And the Tao Te Ching says the warrior approaches a war as if it's a funeral, but still does what he needs to do. And Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, when he meets Krishna on the battlefield, he's in despair in chapter 1. He doesn't want to fight. He doesn't want to kill his cousins, his teachers, his uncles who are fighting on the opposing side. And he has this moment in the middle of the battlefield where he throws his weapons down and says he's not going to fight. And Lord Krishna says, Arjuna, stand up. This isn't the mentality. This isn't the warrior within you. You're a warrior. You must fight. So I hope that helps people. Again, going within, you'll understand what is necessary and what is also your ego, and you'll begin to understand yourself and move forward. But I think with that sense of detachment is really important, practicing that.
In Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, I think it was that. It might be in another book, but Chogyam Trungpa, I really love his teachings on Buddhism. So he gets asked a question about when Jesus got angry. I don't know where I don't know much about Jesus' story in the Bible, but apparently Jesus got angry and flipped the table because in the church they were taking money, and he was saying, this is wrong. And somebody asks that Chogyam Trungpa, what do you think about this display of anger from a spiritual being? And Chogyam Trungpa said, I think it's good, and I think we need more of it. And Osho used to say the same. Osho used to say, many Christians tried to take that out of the text because we can't have Jesus being angry. And Osho used to say, that would have been Jesus at his most beautiful, his
Yeah.
most raw. And I'll be honest with you, I've seen my teacher give firm teachings and they've given me goosebumps. I've wanted to cry because I've seen his passion. Because I told my son off once. I told Bo off once when he was younger because I don't know what he was doing. It was nothing much. But when everything had settled down, I said to him, I said, Bo, I drew a picture of a boat on a piece of paper. And I said, I'm not here to push you in a certain direction. I'm here to try and bring you up to be the best person you can be in the world. I said, but if I let you keep doing mistakes, okay, and you go off, your destination goes off in a different angle, and you end up getting lost in this life, which might always be his journey. I'm not saying, but I said, if I didn't correct that and you get lost, we're both getting karma for that. You with me? Mm-hmm. I have a universal responsibility in this life as your father.
As your father.
As your father. So he got it. He was like, I get it. So sometimes, I've seen my spiritual teacher, when he's seen students going the wrong way, he's put them back in line. And it's beautiful. I mean, I heard one of his students, his longest students, got a firm teaching off Master Shah. Mm-hmm. And he said, say a few words. And Francisco stood up and he said, Master Shah, I've had a few firm teachings of you. And he said, the first one, I actually went into a lot of depression. He said, but as I'm growing, he said, all I feel is your compassion right now. So where I was going with the Chogrium trumpet thing as well is, the reason he says it's good that he acted like that is because it was what the environment at that moment presented. And I remember you asked me a question on the phone when we spoke about this a few months ago. And the way I see it is, and I've learned this lesson the hard way, just say somebody was beating my son up, an adult. If I heard that someone had beat my son up, and then I found them 2 days later, and I beat him up, I don't think that's the right thing to do. But if I came around the corner and saw him beating my son up, the environment, I'm there to stop him. You know what I'm saying? That makes sense?
It does. Again, it's how you do it. Is your intention to kill him because he's hurt your son, or is your intention to stop it, to protect your son and to stop what's going on because you can see that it's wrong? It's authenticity, isn't it, in these teachings as well? And a common misconception with this, which I think is spiritual bypassing, is that everything is good and everything is rosy, and this practice is about becoming good. That's not it. Like, you look at in yoga, they talk about vidya, which is like true knowledge, and all vidya has to be employable true knowledge. So I can give you a practice and I can say that these are the effects of the practice and know that you'll experience it, but you have to experience it. So it's a science, is my point. It's not being good, but the science comes with skillful actions, which are good actions, which are in alignment with the truth, which is one. So if you're serving selflessly, meaning that you're not attached to the outcome, you know what is the necessity in that moment, and you act to that necessity, that is detachment. That is acting with a sense of detachment. It's just doing what needs to be done.
And then dropping it.
That's it. And then moving on. Like, you shared a story with your teacher saying that he got very angry at a student, and then a second later he was laughing, and he had just dropped it. And what's that? That's presence. That's being in the moment. That's being authentic.
It might have even been the same story, believe it or not.
Yeah,
because I actually remember when Francisco turned around and he said, I feel nothing but compassion. Master was laughing his head off. You know what I mean? It's just completely...
It's also fascinating when you think about a dog, right? So you've got a dog, you've got a puppy at the moment.
We've got a puppy.
Wow, it's yours. You have to shock it into line in some instances for its most harmonious relationship with the environment, yourselves, and for the benefit of the dog and the family. Mm-hmm. So
and what's a dog do? After you've told the dog off, does it sit there thinking...
That's it. Moves on. Where's the bone? Where's the ball?
Yeah,
that's it.
Okay, I can't do that. No, do you want to throw the ball?
But again, what action are you doing? If you're not doing it to hurt the dog, it's so much easier to just do it. It's in line and walk away. But if you get really angry within yourself and you do hurt the dog, you walk away and you think, what have I done? That was not me.
It's funny because Osho, again, I remember reading Osho talking about parenting, and he said back in the day, the parents smacked the kids. And he said, and it was not an issue, right? Kid does something wrong, you either tell them off, or if there's something that, you think they need a smack, they got a smack, right? But then it's done. The kid, I did something wrong, I got a smack for it, and now it's all good, and the dad's happy. But I'm pretty sure this teaching was back in the 70s. He was saying how now what's happening, which is very toxic, very poisonous for the family, is the power's been taken away from the parents. So he said now the father can't discipline his kid, but what he does is he starts resenting the kid. It's like a negative seed that's growing inside him, and but what happens to the kid is then thinking, oh my gosh, I've really upset my dad, he doesn't want to be with me. It just goes on and on and on.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. So what do you think we kind of go back to, more generally speaking now, like the older ways of doing things? I think for me, it's very helpful. It has been really helpful noticing these agendas in the world and getting a sense of perhaps the ideas of people who are in charge in the world and making these big decisions and seeing where they're pushing people, because that's pushing me back in the other direction. Like, I think about the experience when I got sick and then I went and saw these doctors, which were the best. I was very fortunate. Not any of them could give me a satisfying answer. So I saw many and I was like, well, their methodology is flawed. They're not looking into what's actually happening. But that occurrence in my life pushed me the other way to realize things. So I was fortunate enough to make it a benefit and allow it to be a benefit, which is, again, is the power of being the creator in the situation. I'm not entirely sure where I was going with that. It spurred to my mind. And I think it's important. It has been important for me on an intellectual level to understand why they're pushing people away from unifying, why they're pushing us away from the truth.
I'll just touch on one thing there. I'm not saying everyone go and start smacking the kids, right? I'm saying that there's a universal collective growth. I remember Thich Nhat Hanh said something really cool. He said someone asked him about the role of the ego, and he spoke about how many different researchers have spoke about a golden age where everyone lived happily, you know what I mean? And he said he believes that when ego came in and we lost the plot, right, which where we are now, he said a humanity that evolves beyond ego is a more conscious humanity than one before it.
Correct.
So with the whole, I don't believe anyone should go back to the way we were, because I don't believe in going backwards. Mm-hmm. So do I believe in the cane? Absolutely not. I don't think kids should be getting beat up at school. Some of the stories I've heard off my mum and dad, I was like, mate, if someone did that to Bo, I just couldn't handle that. You know what I mean?
There's malice in that, though.
Correct. But my point is, as we move forward, we might not smack our kids, but just the way that we parents and discipline them will be more conscious.
For sure. Eckhart Tolle was asked that question, why do we have the ego if the spiritual journey is realizing that you are not the ego? And he says, because the ego shows you what you are not, therefore you can see what you truly are. And
in his 2 books, one thing that I spoke about, I think, to Jake the other day.
But before we go on that, I think it'd be good for people if we did talk about our understanding of what the ego is. Because I know...
Well, this story I'm going to share will be a good starting place.
Brilliant.
Because he talks about how, the way you said you tell a dog off and it's forgotten about. Mm-hmm. In The Power of Now, he tells a story about when he sees the 2 ducks, or the swans, I think it's a duck. The 2 ducks, one duck, that gets in his space, and they have a bit of a fight. And he said, and then they both swim off and they shake that excess negative energy off, and then it's gone, right? They get on with their day. So in A New Earth, which is his second book, he talks about the same, he tells the same story, but it's the duck with a human mind. And he says, imagine that situation happened and the duck had a human mind. It's going to go off and it's going to say, how dare they do that to me in front of all my friends? Time. Ego needs time. So past, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this, and get him. Future. And you're also thinking, I bet you he's now planning to do, you know what I'm saying? It's just this mind chatter.
So the ego creates an identity. And by creating an identity, it has to attach its sense of existence, its sense of self to an identity. So to things. So for example, you might go to the gym a lot and have a great body, and you are telling yourself, repeating in your head that I'm this person with a great body, blah, blah, blah. Girls are attracted to me, blah, 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 whatever. That's your sense of ego that's creating. Why it's flawed is because fundamentally it's going to create you suffering because of the law of impermanence. There's one thing in this world that is so true. Everything is impermanent, and we can see that and experience that moment to moment. Right now we can experience that. This moment has just passed. So by fundamentally attaching our power, our existence to something that is temporary, we're inevitably going to cause suffering.
Yeah, impermanence is not the suffering. The suffering is wanting something to last forever. That's impermanent.
Correct. And again, that's a fundamental flaw as well, because why would you want something to last forever? But we can go into that. So you create your ego without even realizing you create your ego. I'm not egoless. You're not egoless. That's not what we're saying. It's about understanding your nature and the nature of your mind. The nature of your mind is the ego. It is to continue to exist. So it continues to attach and create new identities. And those identities are reaffirmed based on your interactions with people and your interactions with the world. So you can see how the ego continues to create itself layer on layer on layer. And the deeper you go into it, the more and more suffering it's going to cause you inevitably as it begins to break down, which it inevitably will. So that's my understanding of ego. I guess, how do you practice going beyond the ego? Because again, I want to stress that it's not a bad thing. It's teacher. So that's what it's been for me. It's been this teacher. But again, I think meditating and sitting has allowed me to go deeper into the nature of things, meaning how things actually are. And therefore you become more rooted in this sense of something that's aligned with the truth, or these ideals that are aligned with the truth right now. And eventually all ideals will be dropped, which can get you more akin online with out of suffering and into a more blissful state.
I'll tell you one meditation that's helped me a lot lately, I think, which is great, that we can put a link to, is the one you shared with me the other day.
Yeah, absolutely. There's one line in that which is awesome. Essentially, the premise of the meditation, or the intention of the meditation.
It's not even like a guided meditation, is it?
No, it's just a discourse. It's more like a contemplation, isn't it? It's like, but he's just saying you can do all the spiritual practice in the world, but if you don't guard your mind or look through the mind, you'll always be lost. And it really.
But there was a few lines that he says in that really, for me, and maybe it's because I've been meditating for a long time and I understand it might not make a lot of sense for people who are just listening to it. But if it doesn't make sense, I definitely suggest listening to it again in a couple of weeks, and then again and again and again. What it did for me was it allowed me to place my attention on the observant consciousness that's observing. You know what I mean? Because that isn't egoless.
It is. There's an awesome line in that which I really liked, and it's like I think it's something like looking for truth. I'm paraphrasing, it's not verbatim, but looking for truth from an illusion standpoint is like going outside your house and looking for a robber.
Yeah, so in your house, stealing your house.
The robber's in your house, stealing your stuff, and you go outside looking for the robber. It just doesn't make sense. And we have everything we need inside of us. We just have to be able to sit and look and, of course, experience the world.
I was just going to say, so what's that mean? Because when you go inside, it's not the mind.
I gave an example to my friend just on a mind standpoint, just on perception standpoint. I said, let's be very basic. No one wants to suffer, do they? Like, no one I can think of. You may think of people in your life that continue to repeat suffering patterns, and that may be from a trauma, but if you ask someone, you know, do you really want to suffer? It's a fundamental illusion. So what was really, the way I've always seen the world is that, well, since I can remember, is that it's my inner state that controls how I see the world. It doesn't matter what happens to me outside. It's how I interpret it from the inside. So what's the lens? What's the filter that I'm seeing the world through? And that's kind of spurred me to keep practicing. And that's the sense of curiosity, or tapas, they call it in yoga, like that fire, that inner determination to understand it. But I can see the value in understanding and crafting how I see the world, because that's how I experience the world. If I put my attention or my responsibility of how I feel on the outside world, I'm like a leaf in a tornado. Like, good luck to you, you know, like they'll annoy you for doing that one thing. They'll annoy you for doing that one thing, but
whatever information's
coming in
is where you're getting pulled.
That's it. So, and again, that's why I find phones and social media and constant stimulation so destructive to our internal happiness. And you can ask anyone now, and they'll reiterate the same stat that we've all been fed. Everyone's more depressed, more anxious, more separated, yet we're more connected on another level. So why? That's because we're not looking after our minds. We're not looking after how we interpret and see the world.
So going on ego, like, have to, you know, really reading different texts and whatever. I thought of the simplest way to share ego, in my understanding of it, is it's separation consciousness. It is, you know, when I look at different suffering, whether it's spiritual, mental suffering, physical, even physical, cancers, things like this, it's all due to different degrees of separation. So the bigger the ego, the more separation, the more suffering, because you're more anti-life.
It's a lie.
It's a lie. It's anti-life. So if you look at, on a cellular level, you know, you look at Zach Bush, and he talks about what glyphosate does, for example. He says what glyphosate does, it cuts off the connections, the communication from the cells. So a cell then is separated from the whole organism and just basically goes rogue.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a micro. On our level, the bigger the ego, and it doesn't mean, you know, it might be someone like, I think I'm better than you, right? Okay, so I've got a big ego, separation. Or nobody loves me and I've got no. It's still, it doesn't matter. It's still separation, yeah. Ego, and it's still suffering. So what happens then is depression, anxiety. You become a separate, you know, entity in a hostile world, and you suffer. And then if you look at it on a collective, on a macro, the more humanity as a collective see themselves as being separate from this earth, we start destroying the home that we exist on. So for me, ego is just separation consciousness. It's so funny because I spoke to James, my good friend in Nelson Bay, really spiritual guy, beautiful guy. And I shared with him a doctor saying how this lockdown is so dangerous because as people are getting more separated, they're getting sicker, they're killing themselves, depression, and blah, blah, blah. And I almost knew what he was going to reply to me, and it was awesome because he did. He replied back to me and he said, isn't it interesting though, that the sages of past and present separate themselves from humanity?
Mm-hmm.
And to answer that is, if you're separating yourself from humanity to go deeper into a spiritual practice, you're becoming more whole with all existence.
Yeah.
Because fundamentally that is the spiritual journey. It is to completely detach from the ego, which is the separate self, and become one with the totality. And when you become one with the totality, again, it's compassion, because you then don't just see the suffering, you feel the suffering. You feel what the tree is going through. You feel, and I think kids do this naturally. I remember when Bo was little, we drove past people cutting down trees. Bo just was crying his eyes out. It was like he could feel the pain of the trees, you know?
They call it realization. So you're realizing your fundamental nature.
That's already there.
That's already there. And that is the paradox. It exists right now, but it's our illusions, it's our karma, which stops us. Our karma meaning our past actions and present actions, which stop us from seeing things as they are. Also in this book that I'm reading, the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, in the commentary, he also says that everything in nature serves for the existence of something else. It's selfless service. And if we look at ourselves as part of nature and as one big organism, you're going to cause suffering if you try and act separate from everything else, because fundamentally you're not, whether you like it or not. So I got a big insight into service, into consciously serving, because obviously a tree, for example, can only be a tree and can only serve in the nature of it as a tree. But a human, from where we can kind of view it, can do so many different acts of service, can serve in so many different ways. And even just, we've spoken about this many times, it doesn't have to be going out and feeding people at soup kitchens. It's just being, if you know yourself and you're dedicated to your own practice, I truly believe, from my level of understanding at the moment, that's the highest level of service you can possibly do, is to know yourself.
Well, if you look at a tree does serve countless organisms within the tree, insects. It breathes in and breathes out. It breathes in what we breathe out, and what it breathes out is what we breathe in. So, trees and everything offers incredible service. I mean, my Buddhist teacher always said, if you haven't drank for, a week, a cup with water in it is more important than anything at that time. So, but where the Buddha said we're so fortunate to be humans is because our level of consciousness is able to put all of existence consciously before ourselves. And this is why my teacher, and I still get insights into it every day, my teacher emphasizes what he calls universal meditation. So it's the fastest way to clear karma. He says, never meditate on your own. You think about going and working in a soup kitchen, which is great. Definitely we need more physical service. But you might serve that day, and don't get me wrong, it's not, this isn't entirely true. You might touch or serve 300 people. And that's not exactly at the limit, because if your compassion has touched one person and they are inspired to go and share and share and share, every seed holds the potential of a forest. Okay, This is the power of positive action. But what my teacher says, if you want to dedicate an hour a day or 30 minutes a day of singing chanting a mantra for all beings, so you call the soul world all benevolent, Yuanling, all enlightened souls from all traditions, you invoke humanity, you invoke nature, trees, all your ancestors, and you chant for them. Don't want anything in return. I'm here to just sing, I love you, Lucky Sammy, whatever. That is a huge service. He says, never meditate on your own. You know what I mean?
And what are you doing? You're harvesting those intentions within yourself and within your mind by doing that. And I always,
and then you leave the meditation in a state of love and compassion.
That's it. That's what you're creating. And the mind is like a garden is still one of the best anecdotes I've ever heard. It's that the mind is like a garden, and the seeds are there, and we decide whether we allow them to germinate or not. And that's becoming more conscious. So you can't change the nature of your mind being a garden. So for example, you can't stop yourself from thinking. But you can employ practices to allow yourself to pull yourself from the thought stream, and eventually you'll experience a state of bliss as you move deeper into the mind. And there's levels to that, which some I've experienced and some I haven't. So I can only talk from my level. But thinking, like, you look at a garden and you're creating this garden, it's your responsibility. And then you come back and you get frustrated because it's got weeds all in it, and it's got kangaroos and wallabies eating all the plants, and you go, oh, how did that happen? Well, it's because for the last 45 years you've never sat with yourself and meditated. But again, the beauty of nature is that we can redesign and recultivate that by working with it, working in alignment with it. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there, thinking as your mind is a garden, because a garden doesn't stop ever growing.
It's a beautiful approach because, you know, if you look at a lot of architecture now, I've seen a lot of new architects creating houses that blend in with nature, you know, like using natural materials. Now, but if you look at the old mindset, everything's square, boxy, stands out. It's like you see a beautiful lush land, okay, we'll just decimate it and start again. If you look at the mind, the ego's approach to meditation is, I'm just going to work hard and stop my mind thinking, which is the ego wanting to stop the mind, and never going to happen. You're going to just you're going to suffer in your meditations. Whereas a different approach of how to work with it and allow it to be is a more gentle and realistic approach.
So working with the mind, and that's why we spoke about before, cultivating good actions, germinating.
And knowing you're not the mind as well.
That's it. Germinating good seeds will allow you to be able to eventually penetrate the mind, or penetrate levels of the mind. So as you said before, having the intention to serve all beings, or having goodwill in your mind and allowing them to germinate.
Because that also helps. That helps you get through challenging times as well. You know, that story in the Zen tradition where a young monk said to the master, what's the point?
Yeah. And
before he finished, when he got to what's the master knew what he was going to say. The master just said, for all beings.
Yeah.
And I get goosebumps off that, because it's true. It's like you get up in the morning, you know, right now I'm seeing friends and family in the UK who are in the second stage of lockdown. And, you know, I don't really get deflated that often, to be honest with you, but it's because of that. That's one teaching that, just keeps me going. Why meditate? It's not about me, actually. If I do a half an hour meditation, it is, but sometimes the half an hour meditation, I might not necessarily feel like doing it, or that, you know, I might feel agitated. My mind might be busy that day. A beautiful way to just get out of that is because you're thinking of me. I am not feeling, this is me. Instead, when I just shifted to, I'm not asked, I'm going to do it because I want to send love. It's so, forget about trying to stop the mind. Just allow whatever's coming into your mind to come and love it. It's such a simple practice. If you have a thought that comes in, oh, mate, that shouldn't be in my head, just detach from it. See that it's not you, it's a thought, but still take responsibility for it. I love how Sadhguru says responsibility is the ability to respond. It's your respond ability.
Yep.
So the thoughts coming in, I take responsibility for it, because if I've put that negative thought out into the field, like as a fractal, it could be coming back to me. So it's coming back to me because I've probably I will have put it out there. So I take responsibility for it. Instead of attaching to it again, thinking it's bad and pushing it out like I don't want it, I just love it. I love you. You with me?
For sure. And it takes practice. Dark thoughts is an interesting one, because I know that comes up for a lot of people, especially when they begin to start sitting in meditation, and you've attached with your thoughts for so long, and then these dark thoughts start coming up and you go, who am I? Like, who am I as a person? How could I think that? Well, one, it's not you. But I remember when I was in India, I met a girl and we were talking, and she pulled me out of class one day. It was on a yoga school, and I was like, what's this about? Could be a myriad of things. And then she's like, can I talk to you? And I was like, okay. So we go and sit down, and she's like, she's Israeli and she was in the army, and she was saying that, she's like, and now when I sit down, I thought I dealt with all these things, and all I can hear is like gunfire and screaming. She was on the Syrian border. And I was like, sitting there, I was like, wow. And I remember the teaching that I had heard before. And obviously I try and only speak about things I've experienced as well, because I think the rest is theory. When you, as we spoke about this before, there's a transmission that happens when you have experienced something. And I said, look, what happens when you finally give yourself some space to listen or just sit and observe, is that you enter these layers of your mind, and things will come up that you thought were dealt with, maybe you weren't aware of, but they may be coming from this life, they may be coming from a past life. I always try and look at it stoically as well. So what am I facing right now? What can I do right now? So you may sit there and go, how the hell can I detach from this? Like, it's bringing these emotive responses to me which are so full on, it's so difficult. Continue to practice and you'll naturally continue to detach. The beauty of this practice is, or any meditation, is naturally it's becoming familiar with nature. So often you'll go through periods where you'll be trying really hard, and then all of a sudden you'll stop trying and things will just flow. So it's just something I wanted to chuck in there, because I believe we all have a darker side to us and we all have a more benevolent side to us. And I stress it's not about good or bad. For me, it's about truth.
Drop the good or bad.
Drop the idea of good or bad and just see them as they are.
I think it's Miller Raper. There's a story of Miller Raper. I think it's Miller Raper. When he isolated himself and went to live in a cave, he was being tormented by demons.
Mm-hmm.
And he was saying, just leave me alone, just leave me alone. And they wouldn't leave him alone. And then they said, one of the demons said, we will stay until you don't see us as bad. And he had a satori from that.
Yeah.
And he stopped seeing them as bad, and they just slowly dissipated. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I've had that before in meditation as well. It was actually when we were meditating together, and this, like, the best way I can explain it, like, unraveled from the top of my head and like in front of me, and it was just a demon's face. And I was deep in meditation. I was in a space, it was quite still, so there was no reaction. It was like, okay. And then the insight I got from it, and the realization that I got from it, was that I give power to it. I create it. I give it life force. That demon can only exist because of me, if that makes sense. And again, it's about having the stillness, having the awareness to not label things good or bad, to penetrate the nature of the mind, to see that, which takes practice for sure.
It does, but again, it all ties into what we're talking about. Like when I shared in the last video, and we spoke about how our first video of how I found my spiritual path, I was getting bothered by negative entities, mm-hmm. which I believe now could have been my spiritual fathers and mothers, literally trying to wake me up. But maybe it wasn't. But it doesn't matter. The point is, that hasn't necessarily stopped. I've had some full-on experiences over the last 10 years, similar, but it's a completely different response. Mm. It's more of there's just no fear there. I remember probably about a year ago, a friend asked me to offer them a healing, mm-hmm. and I offered them a healing. And that night, I had a full-on experience.
Yeah.
Okay. If I shared, it's scary. And I basically woke up and I just bowed down. I just rolled onto my front. I bowed down and I said, please forgive me for whatever mistake I've made that's even entangled with the person I've given healing to. I remember I was on a podcast with the guys from Radiator, and before we went live, they were asking me a few questions, and one of them said he'd been offering spiritual healing, and he said to somebody, and he was flattened when he was offering the healing. He said, I'm exhausted. I'm dead. I feel exhausted. And I said, are you asking for forgiveness for what they're suffering in? And he said, no. And I said, out of, they tell us there's 8 billion people more plus in the world. That person's gone to you for a healing. Mm. You're entangled in that healing. And he got an aha moment. He was like, wow, I'm going to ask for forgiveness for my part in it. You know what I'm saying?
Mm. Yeah.
Is there anything you want to, because there's something I want to touch on. In the next video, we're not going to go into it now. I want to do a conversation on dying.
Yep, for sure.
I think it's an important subject. It's for, because I think so many people right now are scared of dying because we've lost what it means to die.
Yep.
And I think we can shed some light on also how to handle someone dying as well. But I'm just putting that out there. But what I was going to ask was, for people who are watching this, who are like my dad and your dad, right? Who might be listening to it thinking, you know what, that makes a bit of sense. I actually like what they're saying. But they think they're stuck in their ways, or maybe I'm a bit too old. What do you think is something they can do on a daily basis that is simple, that will add value to their life straight off the bat?
I think I'd like to start by saying that I'm extremely blessed. This existence, whatever this is within this body, I'm very, very blessed. Like, I have a healthy body. I'm aware of these things. And as I said, I often think about when I was a younger kid, and like I've always sort of seen the world from this sort of perspective, a detached perspective. So I feel very, very, I hope gracious, but very humbled and very blessed. And I know that for a lot of people, it is really difficult, is what I'm getting at. Like, I have a healthy body. I practice yoga. I'm able to sit in these positions for not a long period of time. So my advice to anyone, like, you use the example of your dad, my dad, and I think about them, and obviously there's suffering there, like there is for all of us. I think one thing you can do, if you really do struggle to sit there with yourself right now, because I know a lot of people do, you have to understand the value in it, but that's okay. I think one of the most life-changing years of my life was last year. And it was when I was just returning to health, and I was working at a school with boarding children, or kids that lived at school. And my role was quite simple. I would just come in a few nights a week and on the weekend and hang out with them and just do my job, supervise them. And it was such an enlightening year for me because of one reason. It was about them. It wasn't about me. And I got to see how much my interaction with them meant to them. So my point is that consciously doing things for others and just doing it for them was so enlightening for me. And I often, even this year, I found that I long for that as well. Like, to be able to, I don't want to say help others. I just want to say genuinely connect with others and care for other people and be able to act upon that. So one thing people can do is just simply in any interaction, put someone above yourself before you.
We spoke about not long ago about a reality check. I remember my niece, Francesca, when she was a baby, she got bacterial meningitis or something like that. So it was one of them. I'm pretty sure it was bacterial meningitis. And she went to the hospital. And when you go to a children's hospital, it's a great slap in the face of what we complain about. You know what I mean? We've seen my sister, who was very compassionate woman, but there was a kid there who was like 7, and I think he'd had like 27 major operations. He couldn't talk. He was dumb, and he carried like a drip around with him. Apparently, the doctor said the nurse said he's in constant pain, and he was happy running around playing. He'd never been out of hospital. And my sister, I went to see my sister one day, and you could tell she'd been crying a lot. And she said she was with Francesca, and she said when the overnight she stayed there, this poor kid was just going like this. So she went over to him, and he was doing this, and apparently the nurse said if he does this, it means he's in pain. And she went over and she sat with him, and she just held his hand and said, I'm here all night. Don't worry about it. And she said, just off that, he went asleep. And I just, I was crying when she told me. It makes me want to cry even telling it now. But I think sometimes it's a good reality check to just see even just go and see homeless people. When I used to work in Sydney, it was sometimes I'd have like a hoodie on and like a short sleeve jacket on, and then I'd see a guy in a t-shirt and jeans on the road. It was just such a reality check. I mean, I'd take my coat off and just give him my coat. So yeah, I agree with you on that one. I think another one, which is just more of like when I look back at what's been very, very life-changing in such a short time, it was cutting out the news, eh?
Yeah.
I mean, literally, if you want a tangible experience, and if you want to also have a direct look at your attachments to what's got to the news, 10 days, no newspaper, no news, and just no violent movies. I remember Master Shah, my teacher, he said, you don't want to watch violent movies when you're pregnant. And he said, you hear gunshots in the movie and you hear screaming, and maybe the mother's engrossed in the movie, she might get scared or anxious. Babies listening and feeling everything. When he said it, it just light bulb went on. I was like, how insane.
They can measure that now, from a scientific standpoint. I've heard Bruce Lipton talk about that. I've heard Greg Braden talk about that as well.
So, I mean, just cut off violence and negative information, because this is information. Our body, everything is information and an exchange of information. You feel the sun on your hand or the wind in your face. It's the information of the sun or the wind changing, interacting with the information field of your body. So just by cutting off all mainstream information and violent movies, and tell you what, mate, within 10 days, you'll see the world differently, eh?
Yeah.
And that has a knock on, hello, mate, that not just relaxes the mind. What happens then? You release tension in the body, don't you?
Yeah,
because what happens when you're anxious? You're breathing shallow.
Mm-hmm. You tense up.
You're tense. You're inflamed.
Yep.
You're acidic.
Yeah.
These are all breeding grounds for cancer as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that can be why it can be seemingly so difficult to step out of that cycle. And that was the point I was making before. I feel very blessed that I feel free in senses, in some senses, of course. Yeah, I was mentioning this to you the other day. It's when people ask me or people mention me, like I had an interaction with old mate down at the shops the other day. We're having a chat, gave me my juice, and for whatever reason, he told me he'd cut off the news. And I was like, who watches the news? Shows how much I'm in my own little world sometimes. And I was like, how long's it been? He's like, 5 months. And I was like, yeah, you feel good? He's like, I feel amazing. And it does baffle me on one hand when people don't realize that the information they're taking in, whether they're aware of it or not, is affecting them. It's affecting you all. So you might think, even just being mindful of how you're going to sleep, I think is a really big one as well. Like if you're lying in bed and you're watching a violent movie and you're not having a great sleep and you're waking up annoyed and
Wi-Fi modem next to your head and your phone next to you.
You got your phone on next to you. Like, for goodness sake, please just put it on airplane mode or something while you sleep. Give your body a chance. Turn it off. But yeah, just being mindful, like everything has a cause and effect. It's the simplest way I can put it. So the information you put into your garden there's going to be a seed there. It's up to you whether you decide whether you germinate that seed or not. But if you're not conscious, if you're not aware, you're not practicing, then these seeds may just germinate. And then all of a sudden you have an outlandish reaction to someone. You mistreat your wife, you mistreat your child. You're out of control. So yeah, I hope people can see the value in it.
As far as an actual practice goes, and I'm talking to people here, as I said, like my dad, who's 75 nearly, who's watches the news every day, reads the paper inside and out.
Yeah,
I think a simple practice, because I'm always trying to get everything I've learned and put it simpler and simpler and simpler. I think, and I may have shared this before, but a rule of thumb, they know that if you're breathing fast, shallow, noisy, irregular through the mouth and into the chest, stress response. Okay. Mm-hmm. And you think about it, if you're watching the news, or you're watching, like, or you're going to have a fight or something, you think you're in it, that's how you're breathing. You're breathing irregular through your mouth, up here, and you're tense in your gut. If you change your breathing to slow, deep, quiet, regular through the nose and into the lower abdomen, it's a calming response. So you think about the mind as a polarity organ, okay? Creative, analytical. So it's right, wrong, good, bad, everything you see. So sometimes we have a challenge in life trying to work it out. It's like a dog chasing its tail. Understand that by changing your breathing, you change the body's physiology, creates a space, calms the mind then.
Yep.
So a practice I would suggest is starting with 10 conscious breaths, just 10, where you follow it through the nose all the way in, all the way out. And at the end of it, in your heart, give an intention that you love all beings.
Yep. And if you don't feel comfortable doing that last bit, just breathe.
Yep.
It's a progressive thing. But I think in terms of practices, I reckon you explain that brilliantly. And that's a game changer for sure. I think breath, how you just explained it, bang on.
But I think get in the habit of loving all beings.
Yeah, for sure. But
even if you just say it and feel it.
But I think about myself though, right? And sometimes I don't love all beings.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So, and I know that people are in this separate consciousness. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure it would help.
Do though.
I do deep down, and I get you. That's the essence of yourself, and that's uncovering the essence of yourself. But sometimes when I'm angry or I'm annoyed and I tell myself love all beings, I quickly think F all beings. You know what I mean?
Can I add something though?
Yeah, of course.
Would you still feel like that if you did 10 conscious breaths? Because the 10 conscious breaths prepare yourself for that statement.
Okay, I get you.
If you've just had the egg at your window from the kid next door, right? And you're thinking, I love all beings, but deep down you're thinking, I'm going to beat his dad up with his head. It's like, really, what if you take the breaths? I use the analogy of a boxer, okay? For someone who doesn't know what boxing is, they think a corner man is just there to give you water and put the stool down in between rounds, but it's not. A corner man is there to see the fight that you can't see in the fight. Because when you're in the fight, it's like when you go through spiritual testing, you can't see the woods through the trees. You're in it, okay? You're in the drama. So a corner man, when you come back and might say, look, mate, you're dropping your left hand. You might not know you're doing that, or you're going to be able to get him here because he's dropping his left hand and you didn't notice it. So my point is, I see that's the role of a spiritual teacher. A spiritual teacher is seeing your challenges as been there, detached from where you are, just compassionate, and can say, look, Nick, this is where you need to go in your life. But let's say you don't have a spiritual teacher. By creating a gap, by creating a space to be able to detach from what's going on in the drama and observe it, you can then be your own corner man.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the breath creates the space.
It's an awesome analogy, a really good analogy. I love it. I think keeping it really simple, because fundamentally the truth is so simple. You don't need to go and do all these complicated things. And if you do, and
you end up coming back.
Yeah, I'll always come back. Like, for example, I'm at the moment with my practice, I'm just doing in the morning and at night 30 minutes of mindfulness meditation. So that might be.
Do you dedicate it to all beings at the end?
No.
Okay.
In the morning, yes, I do. I do that. And I also invocate any of my spiritual guides, Tao, which is Source, Buddha, and a few other deities. that I feel connected to for whatever reason, yeah, I always do. And I say, may this practice benefit all beings. But that's because that's how I'm feeling in that moment. Again, it's about being authentic. I don't think you should say or do anything that doesn't feel as though you're ready to do that yet. But as you said, if you do take those 10 breaths, you come in this state of presence. But that's what meditation techniques like following the breath allow you to do. They allow you to focus on something which enables you to pull you from the mind stream. So there's that separation there. You mentioned spiritual teacher before, and I think it just came to me. I was like, that's also what a good friend is. You know what I mean? Like a corner man. It's really important to have good people around you. And I define good people as people that believe in you and they believe in your potential and they're honest with you. I think that's really super important.
You know what? I had a woman, I've had this a number of times when I was talking.
But before we go on,
I'm so sorry.
Sorry, just to make the distinction, there is definitely a difference between a friend and a spiritual teacher. Yep. I'm just talking about for this example, but yeah, carry on.
Yeah, no, a woman from England who I've never met before messaged me the other day and said, do I do like one-on-one sessions? Do a charge for a one-on-one session? I've had a number of people saying like, will I be a mentor and things like that? And I always just say, mate, we can phone up and have a chat. I'm your mate. You know what I'm saying? I think you're spot on. The difference is I'm not a master. I don't claim to have mastered anything. I mean, you living with me, you knows how much of mad I am. So I don't claim to have attained anything. So if I haven't mastered myself fully, I'm not going to be somebody's teacher. But I'll always be there as a friend. You want to phone me? You want to have a chat? So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And you are teaching people. I mean, sure you are,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I know what you mean. You don't see yourself like that. Again, it's just teaching what you've experienced and you're fortunate enough and blessed enough to be able to do so. Yeah, it's, I think also one thing I did want to say for whatever reason is why I was so disenchanted with the mainstream narrative you mentioned news before is from a very simple intellectual standpoint is that none of it at all was about genuine long-term solutions. It was all about how bad is this? How uproiled should we be about this? This is disgraceful. Who's going to pay for this? Speaking about this earlier in the podcast, it's not a sustainable approach. It's not an approach akin to truth.
Well, I have said this before, that you and your brother, Jake, are smart lads. And I don't say that to make you feel good, but it's true. And I tell you why, is because when I've shared things or even with Jake, it's new information, but the way he's able to, and yourself, is analyze it, or even just the way you respond to it is very mature. So while you're on that subject, one thing that you've said a number of times when we've spoke about current situations, how you've always said, stick to the facts. And so how do people who are so triggered by mainstream headlines, have you got a message for them or a tip for them? How do they detach from the mainstream headline, and how do you observe a mainstream headline and make up your own decision? What's the difference there, or what can you help them with?
It's causing you pain. It's causing you to suffer. Reading those things is intentionally invoking a response, and you're giving away your power. They've got you exactly where they want you. And that's...
But what if someone doesn't believe that they're out to do that?
Yeah, what I'm talking from is you've just given away your power. You're just annoyed for the rest of the day. You may be annoyed for the next 20 minutes. And again, it affects your life. So it's not constructive. It's not going to get us anywhere. And again, you can look at the facts and you can say, oh, I don't like that. But what's the difference between looking at a headline and looking at a fact? Is a headline's been created by someone to intentionally create an emotive response, perhaps. And a fact is just a fact. So when you look at a headline, you go, oh, I disagree with that. I can't believe they're doing that. You know, what's going on with the world? But then when you look at a fact, you might be like, oh, I don't like that. But then you accept it because it's a fact. So that's why it's so important to look at the facts. But it can be very overwhelming taking in all this information. And as I've said many times before, I have a very blessed life. People are under a lot of pressure. Under no illusion, it's very difficult to people to detach from things that directly influence their life in a way that may not directly influence my life. So naturally there's a bit more space there. You ask how. I think it's a phrase that gets thrown around so much, but it's just common sense. And again, I said before,
such a shame. This is no common sense.
But I said, is it constructive? You know, like, is it going to improve us? Is it going to improve the world around us?
Or is it drama?
Or is it drama? And again, we spoke about this in another podcast. I intentionally never stand for something or be a part of a group or identity other than myself, if that makes sense. Because often if you're an identity or you're part of this big group, like you talk about identity politics at the moment, you're an anti something, you're against something. So what's that cultivating? That's cultivating a war. That's cultivating feelings of negative energy. So inevitably that's going to cause you suffering, and it's not constructive. We know that
some of these marches have been pro-freedom, though. They're freedom marches.
We spoke about the side podcast. There's a way you can do things and you can be a part of something. But again, I think it's taking responsibility for yourself and your inner state and realizing that you can influence how you see the world and how you don't see the world, which is very different to being ignorant of facts, but you can interpret them how you wish to interpret them. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah, it's also, if it's too much for you and it's impacting you negatively, turn it off. Just simply turn it off and focus on yourself and focus on the people around you. Focus on your children. Focus on
and see how life continues without it.
Life continues without it, and
more peacefully.
Notice how you feel, and then you won't want to go back and watch the news 10 hours a day, 24 hours a day, which it's on.
Because world peace is each person's responsibility in it.
Correct.
If someone said to me, do you think you'll ever see world peace? And in all honesty, in that Buddhist cosmology, they say reality is a backdrop to consciousness. So if you're unhappy, you see an unhappy world, you see unhappy people. If you're happy, you see a happy world. So if you're peaceful, you experience world peace. There's 8 billion people in the world. There's 8 billion worlds. Everyone's observing their version of the world. So if you can cultivate peace within yourself, then you're experiencing world peace. And if everybody else did that, we really would literally see a peaceful world.
Yes, for sure. Like if the individual changes, the world changes. If how you see the world changes, the world changes. I mean, we've spoken about this many times as well. Like if, for example, we were to experience free energy, no one had to pay bills anymore and everyone was just working. And I don't necessarily know if we're ready for that consciously. Maybe we are. I think we're definitely edging closer.
And that's why these steps that are happening right now are happening for a reason. I think they're pushing us so we're ready.
That's it. And the way forward, again, I do my best not to see things as good or bad and try not to impress anyone by being, oh, this is the good way to do it, or being a nice person. That's why I get so much from these ancient teachings of Buddhism and the yogic teachings, the ancient Orthodox Hindu teachings, is that it's based on science. It's based on vidya, self-knowledge. That's what it's based on, meaning that these are the practices. You go and do it and see what happens.
And that takes responsibility.
And that's responsibility.
Because so many people don't like taking responsibility now. They'd rather blame and point the finger for why their life's bad or why they're not successful or whatever. That's why karma was such a big one for me, because I thought, wow, anything that happens to me is not coming from outside. It's my stuff.
Exactly right.
Past life, it's my stuff. So there's no more being a victim.
But it's as simple as it's happened. Whether you like it or not is irrelevant. What are you going to do about it?
Yep. And so that's why I like what you just said there as well, because it's the same as when I found my teacher. I'm not really easily convinced. And when I was reading about opening spiritual channels and all this stuff, I just thought, I'm either going to prove you right or prove you wrong. If he says, do this, we'll get that result, I'm going to do it and see if it does. And it did.
That's
the same with Buddha. Buddha says, you do you take the precepts, you do the Eightfold Path, you'll start seeing changes in your life.
That's what I would stress. You just hit the nail on the head. Go and try it yourself. Don't listen to what I say. Don't listen to what he says.
Definitely
don't listen to what the book says. Read it, take it in, and then go and try it yourself. Do it all yourself. And that's why I'm comfortable sitting here and speaking about it now, is because, as you just said, you go and do it and you're like, whoa. And it comes and you experience it in ways that are beyond.
The Buddha wrote a sutra on finding a guru. My teacher says, when you're looking at a teacher, see, are they working for the benefit of all beings or themselves? Okay, which we just spoke about, that separation, saving the self or others. The Buddha said, if you follow a teacher blindly, right, without investigating the teaching, my Buddhist teacher said, you should actually she has a Tibetan teacher, Tibetan Lama, Rinpoche, and he said, you should watch a teacher for 12 months. So you should see if their teaching has solid ground and if they're living the teaching, and then decide whether you want to follow them or not. Because the Buddha said, if you follow a teacher blindly, it's like a bull being pulled around by the ring in its nose. So anything anyone says, you have no attachment to it. Don't believe it. Be skeptical, but learn how to listen. The Fifth Agreement is don't necessarily just believe it. See how it feels first. It might resonate with you straight off the bat. That's always a good sign. But go deep into it. Even if you just reflect, go deep. Does this make sense? Instead of just going, that's bullshit. Just go deep into it and then follow the steps. Practice.
Science. That's what you do in science. Yeah, you mentioned a story. Because again, it's responsibility. So you're not your teacher's responsibility. You're your responsibility, and that can be very daunting. But as I've said before, it's also the most empowering realization ever, because that's your sense of control. I guess that's your, for lack of a better term, control is probably not the right word, but it's up to you whether you like it or not. And
when you change your life as well, or you change how you respond, and you can calm yourself, you'll definitely start influencing other people.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. There's something about, I'm sure people have experienced, when you come across someone that's peaceful or calm in their demeanor, there's a magnetism there. There's a draw there. There's a pull there. And again, that's about going more into yourself, understanding yourself more, giving yourself more space to actually allow yourself to feel that.
Existence means to stand out. And what where the paradox is, which is funny, is some of the greatest teachers, like your Lao Tzus, your Buddhas, your Jesus or whatever, they stood out because they were so humble.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And again, it's our ego which stops us from, which we allow to stop ourselves from experiencing that. Yeah. What do you reckon? Anything else you want to call it? Yep. Have some breakfast.
Yep. Thanks anyone that's tuned in. If you do like what you're listening to, I've had a few people contact us and say they're enjoying it, which is good. But I think there's a lot of valuable information in the podcast we've done so far. And I just ask if you'd share it. We're not really interested in getting famous, but if the message can get out and help people, then I'd appreciate you sharing it.
Yeah, totally agree. I hope it helps you. And if it doesn't, as you always say, just drop it. And yeah, if you'd like to share it or subscribe, feel free. Please do it. I think by you sharing it helps others, or hopefully it does. But yeah, for now, thank you very much.
Take care.
Thank you.